+1 standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2 or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dewbs and Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it's 9 o'clock. This is Patrick Christys Start Tonight with me, Mark Dolan.
This was a meeting to pull together our response. A response both to the immediate challenge, which is clearly driven by far-right hatred.
The media and political elites are ignoring public concerns about Britain's broken society. Shame on them for labelling anyone concerned about the very real problems facing this country as far right. I'll be revealing just how we save Britain in 2 minutes' time. Also tonight, one of the BBC's biggest stars has tonight stuck the boot into Huw Edwards with their brave and scrupulous reporting. Could there be yet more to come out about the now disgraced face of BBC News? I'll be joined by a former top BBC executive. We also have a bombshell exclusive that suggests Edwards' behaviour is just the tip of the iceberg at the BBC. Don't miss that. That's an exclusive at 10. Plus,
I'm not going to defect to reform, no. And I hope I'm not driven out to reform by my colleagues.
Well, she's clearly left the door open to a potential deflection. Will the Tory wet drive another true Conservative from the party? Reform's Justice spokeswoman Anne Widdecombe gives her unfiltered verdict shortly. Also tonight, the first of tomorrow's front pages with my press pack. This evening, political consultant Suzanne Evans, Conservative peer Lord Bailey and former Labour Party advisor Matthew Larzer. Oh, and what's going on here?
Hey! Welcome to the US! Welcome to the US!
I shall reveal all. An action-packed 2 hours to come. The BBC at 10. You won't want to miss it. Let's get to work. I am furious tonight. The media and political elite are clearly ignoring public concerns about Britain's broken society. I'll tell you how we save our great country next.
The top story from the GB newsroom tonight. The Prime Minister convened a news conference this afternoon at Downing Street, and he told police chiefs that officers should tackle rioters using the same powers used to ban football hooligans. He's announced a new violent disorder unit in the wake of the Southport stabbings and disturbances across some other parts of the UK, including outside Downing Street last night. Sir Keir Starmer has insisted he'll put a stop to the thugs.
The community of Southport had to suffer twice. A gang of thugs got on trains and buses, went to a community that is not their own, a community grieving the most horrific tragedy.
The Prime Minister, well, a Section 60 order is in effect in Southport tonight following disorder there earlier on this week. It grants police greater stop and search powers. That order effective until 6 o'clock tomorrow evening, and it means additional officers will be on the streets. And earlier on today, a teenage male charged over the mass stabbing in Southport on Monday night was named as Axel Rudakubana. 3 children, 7-year-old Elsie, Alice, who was 9, and 6-year-old Bibi were killed during an attack on their dance class, which was in the school summer holidays. 2 other girls who were injured in the same stabbing spree have now left hospital. Let's just bring you some news coming to us from some unrest that's been taking place in Hartlepool tonight. I can tell you that an 11-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of arson after a police vehicle was set alight during a protest. Now, that refers to a protest that was taking place last night in Hartlepool. We know there were several scenes of unrest right across the country, North Manchester, Aldershot and Hartlepool. Well, Assistant Chief Constable David Felton has shared a statement with us tonight. He said, "This is very much a live investigation and we're continuing to work to identify those involved in the disorder yesterday evening and bring them to justice." Well, in other news today, the BBC says it's considering legal action to claim back some of its payments to the former newsreader Huw Edwards. The Director-General, Tim Davies, said today the organisation is looking at all options after the 62-year-old pleaded guilty to 3 counts of making indecent images of children yesterday. Mr Edwards was the BBC's highest-paid newsreader before he resigned in April, earning more than £475,000 in the last year alone. Now to some news from the United States, where Donald Trump has sparked some controversy today after questioning the racial heritage of Kamala Harris. Speaking to a panel of black journalists, the former president claimed Miss Harris had changed from identifying as Indian American to now being black. His suggestion was that the vice president was using her race for political advantage.
I don't think I've ever been asked a question so in such a horrible manner. First question. You don't even say, hello, how are you?
Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is only on the ticket because she is a black woman?
Well, I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She has always identified as a black woman.
I respect either one. I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't.
Donald Trump speaking earlier. Now, in sport, Andy Murray's tennis career has come to an end with defeats in the quarter-finals of the Olympics in Paris alongside Dan Evans in the men's doubles. Murray bows out from the sport as a double Olympic champion, 3-time Grand Slam winner and, of course, former world #1. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Polly Middlehurst. I'm back in an hour. See you then.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. People rioting in the streets, cops turning a blind eye to violence, knife crime out of control, British values and the rule of law discarded. We need a Conservative government, but we don't have one and haven't had one for decades, and that's why we're in trouble. Whilst the violence that we've seen in Southport, Hartlepool and elsewhere this week is appalling and unacceptable, particularly any attack on our brave police officers, it is wrong to ignore the concerns that people have about how our society is functioning or not, as the case may be. And it's even worse to label them far-right. This was Sir Keir Starmer's hot air response today as he set up a police task force to tackle the riots.
And let me be clear, the meeting this afternoon was not about pointing the finger of blame. That is not how this government of service conducts its business, because it doesn't work. Rather, this was a meeting to pull together our response, a response both to the immediate challenge, which is clearly driven by far-right hatred.
Spare me the pearl clutching. Just as those who called out the madness of lockdowns and mask and vaccine tyranny were labelled granny killers, so the accusation of racism or extremism is the automatic response of the political and media elite, who enjoy enhanced social status from their virtue signalling and their luxury beliefs, whilst ordinary Brits pay the price. Woke progressives in the media and in politics, whose views politics professor Matthew Goodwin estimates to represent a maximum of 15% of British public opinion, take great pleasure in mantras like diversity is our strength, whilst insulated from the reality of parallel communities in working-class towns, where the language is not spoken, where British values are not shared, and where the rule of law is taken with a pinch of salt. The trouble that we've seen on the streets, which I once again absolutely condemn, is a symptom of an ignored problem and caused by the gaslighting of those who govern us. Why shouldn't people be angry about vast legal net migration, which has a direct impact on the availability of housing, school places and NHS resources, not to mention social cohesion? They should be angry. Why shouldn't people be angry about illegal immigration, with people entering the country whose backgrounds and legal status we do not know, and the accommodation of whom is costing £8 million a day and rising? They should be angry. If you think it's OK for fit, fighting-age young men to chuck their phones and documents in the sea, then land on our shores and run for the hills, then I can't help you. But of course, in Islington, North London, these folk are heroes, because in Islington, they do not live with the consequences, unlike residents of small towns blighted by migrant hotels. The message is clear from politicians on both sides of the aisle, as well as woke TV stars and right-on journalists. We don't care about your pathetic little lives. And if you call out the realities of our increasingly broken society, you are a bigot, you're far right, and you're a racist too, obviously. Even though it is Brits of all colours, all races and all cultures who are worried about what is happening to their country. The truth is that there are horrible racists out there and far-right thugs who disgustingly have made hay this week. But those horrible creatures shouldn't be lumped in with the millions of people who feel that increasingly our country doesn't work anymore. People who feel unsafe, who feel afraid, who feel sad, and who feel a profound sense of injustice at resources diverted away from them. Diverse, multicultural Britain can work, but only when based around the idea of one nation, a single vision for the country for its future, a single set of values, a single shared dream, a single hope for what this country is and can be, not siloed, ghettoised communities living parallel lives. Now, I'm a Dolan. I'm the son of Irish immigrants myself. And my parents came here in the 1960s with a clear plan to become British, to assimilate. That is the duty of anyone privileged enough to arrive here and to call this place home. Now, I embrace diversity. Britain has always been diverse, but it only works when rooted in common values, British values of decency, fairness, tolerance, freedom, openness, commitment and hard work. Britain's strictest head teacher, Catherine Birbalsingh, told me on this show last night that multiculturalism is failing because whilst it offers rich opportunities, it needs to be managed and worked upon. I completely agree. If that doesn't happen, and fast, the country, as we once knew it, will be lost forever. Now, let's get reaction from tonight's top pundits. I'm delighted to have political consultant Suzanne Evans. We also have Conservative peer Lord Bailey and former Labour Party advisor and head honcho Matthew Larser. Great to see all three of you. Thank you so much for joining me. Suzanne Evans, where shall we start with this? I think that there's a huge chasm now between the media and political elite and the British people.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was listening to an interview on BBC Radio 4 at lunchtime today, and I was absolutely horrified to hear the reporter talking about what's happening and basically saying, you know, there's this awful group of far-right people who complain about immigration and they think that immigrants are doing violent crime, and there's absolutely no evidence to support that. The problem is we don't know, and you might remember before the general election, Robert Jenrick, MP, was talking about how he thinks it's wrong that crime statistics about migration are not released into the public domain, whereas perhaps they should be. But it also means reporters can't say, well, certain people aren't doing crime if you don't have the statistics available. So that's the first thing. The other thing is I was absolutely furious to hear Keir Starmer's speech today, not because he rightly condemned the violence, as we all should, but because of the contrast with when you might remember a couple of weeks ago we had violence in Leeds caused by the traveller community. And I remember on this very programme saying Leeds City Council putting out a statement saying, we're so terribly sorry, we haven't listened to the community, we will do better. And yet here we have a community that's being completely ignored. Millions of us who are absolutely furious about excessive legal migration, absolutely untrammelled illegal migration. I mean, how many people have come over in boats since Karma became PM now? About
just under 2,000.
Just under 2,000. Yeah, you know, and then he talks about the far right using this as an excuse. But what's Starmer doing? He's using this as an excuse to deflect attention away from the problems of illegal migration, from the problems of those anti-Semitic hate marches that we see week in, week out, that are policed in a completely different way to any other kind of march. He's using that as an excuse to basically point out that he wants to be a less free society. He's talking about facial ID, he's talking about cracking down on travel for certain people whose views he doesn't like. I'm just sick to death of it, and I think a lot of people are really sick of this, not having our concerns taken seriously. And unfortunately, there are people, I'm afraid, who have completely lost control, who are completely out of order, but that is the fault of the political class that's refused to listen for years and years and years, and now they're desperate to deflect attention from anyone who's pointing that out.
Now, Sean Bailey, the Prime Minister is right that there are figures on the far right who have capitalised on this opportunity to cause trouble, but the elephant in the room is that millions of people in this country are deeply concerned about legal and illegal immigration.
Look, it isn't even about legal and illegal immigration. What it's about is impacts on your community. And where he was very wrong in his statement, he talked about the people who weren't even from that community. He is wrong, because that community is replicated across the country. So you could be 200 miles away from that community and look at it, well, that's exactly how we are. Actually, do I feel the same? And he needs to understand it isn't a physical community, it's a spiritual one. It's the one that everybody thinks they're involved in. And if he doesn't understand that, we're in big trouble. But the real deeper piece is people on the left have a blind spot for this. That's why he immediately went to the far right accusation, because what that does, it makes him feel better and it makes him feel like people are opposed to his view. But you have people from communities who are clearly not far right, not far right, and he needs to be able to speak to them as well. And if he keeps ignoring how people feel, our social problems will grow.
Is the Prime Minister killing the messenger by labelling everyone far right that's concerned about parallel communities in our country and a society that's not integrated, Matthew?
He didn't do that. What he did was condemn the appalling scenes we've seen in Southport and across the country, including outside Downing Street, over the past 48 hours, which are organised by people on the far right. They were bussed into Southport. If you go and talk to the people of Southport, they are furious that their grief at this appalling tragedy has been hijacked by far-right political activists who literally arrived in the town just to cause trouble when the town clearly wants to come to terms with this appalling tragedy. Nobody is saying that that anybody who's concerned about immigration is far right. What you are saying is that these demonstrations have clearly, which saw violence in Downing Street last night, as well as violence around the country, are clearly being stoked by far-right activists, and you know that needs to be clamped down on. And just as any other protest which would see violence like this needs to be clamped down on. Well, I agree with Suzanne. After the events in Leeds, I think the statement was wrong that the council and the police put out. But you know, we haven't seen firecrackers thrown at Downing Street by anybody else over the last 2 weeks.
I think you're right to defend Sir Keir Starmer regarding the fact that this has been an opportunist act by some extremists on the far right, who I described as dreadful creatures in my monologue. But is Labour and is the Prime Minister going to gaslight everybody that's concerned about what's happening to this country with people living in parallel communities, not integrating, not speaking the language, and potentially also having a sort of criminal effect as well?
Well, no, because I think that the concern about parallel communities goes across the political divide. I mean, actually, that phrase comes from a report that was commissioned by the last Labour government.
So Labour will tackle it, and they won't call people that are worried about our poorly integrated society as far right.
No, it's not people. It's not worrying about integration are far right. It's the people who are stoking this violence are certainly far right.
Briefly, Sean.
They won't. If you look at how people are able to hijack this, Keir Starmer never addressed the spark. Why do these people exist? Why do they have such purchase in society? That's why I use the word blind spot.
But they don't. It's a minority of people, Sean.
And to immediately go to the far right, alienates people, because you're sat there thinking, well, I have some concerns. Am I far right?
But the far right... How do you address the issue that the far right had a presence in Southport? Yeah.
Of course they had a presence, and like you said, there's thuggery there. There's no doubt there's thuggery there. But Keir Starmer has to look at how does he address people who have these concerns without labelling them far right, because he pushes them.
Yes, I think that briefly, Suzanne, I think the message from the reading between the lines of the Prime Minister is to suggest that to be concerned about community tensions is to be far right. It's the interpretation of it.
Yeah, and I think it's also he's making the point, trying to make the point that the far right is a bigger problem, and frankly, I don't think it is.
All right, well, look, Matthew doesn't agree. This show is all about opinions. We'll get more of them with the papers at 10:30. But coming up later this hour, one of the BBC's biggest stars has tonight stuck the boot into Huw Edwards with very brave and scrupulous reporting. Could there be yet more to come about the former face of the BBC newsroom? Former BBC producer John Mayer reacts shortly. But next up, as GPs vote in favour of industrial action, which could make it even harder to get an appointment, are GPs punishing patients for their pay? Broadcasting legend Christine Hamilton goes head-to-head with a top GP. That's next. Thank you.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. Most people will be familiar with French artists such as Auguste Renoir, Claude Monet and Camille Pissarro, who, with others, made up the Impressionist movement of the late 19th century. But we are probably less familiar with the British contingent of the Impressionists, artists like Frank Bramley, Elizabeth Armstrong Forbes and Walter Langley, amongst many others. David Messam is on a mission to change that. I'm joined by David Messam and by Patrick Duffy, an esteemed archivist. These people we're talking about, are they really Impressionists? I mean, I assume they're British, but are they Impressionists?
I think we had the same query when we wrote a book about the whole thing in '85, actually. And we were the book nearly went out as The Garden of Bright Images, actually, though my author then, Laura Wortley, was quite insistent that it should be called The Garden of Bright Images, but I thought probably we'd put it in the gardening section, actually. So, you know, the question you ask is what is on other people's minds, too, actually. Have we got Impressionism in this country? I think for me, as I used to do quite a lot of shopping, if you like, in America, looking for English pictures out there, and they've got American Impressionism, and I'm quite happy with it, but the English are different.
Were they friends and colleagues? Were they collaborators with the French Impressionists?
Broadly speaking, British Impressionism is, as we term it, is the post-Impressionist movement. So they were certainly inspired by the French Impressionist movement as it was, but they came later. They travelled around Europe and became attuned to plein-air painting, so painting outdoors, and that's what they brought over with them. We call it British realism, but there's a focus.
British realism, I kind of recognise.
Yeah,
I mean, that's exactly what that looks like.
The People's Channel. Weekday weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m, followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain, followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christys. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
As time passes,
she could have saved Storm.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different. Patrick Christys tonight from 9 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Coming up, could there be yet more to come out about the former face of BBC News, Huw Edwards? But first, are GPs punishing patients by voting for industrial action? It's time for our head-to-head. Yes, that's right, folks. GPs today voted overwhelmingly in favour of industrial action. In a row over the new funding allocation for surgeries, the BMA has told GPs to choose from a range of measures designed to wreak havoc across the NHS. The number of appointments available each day could be slashed by up to a third. While the BMA insists the target isn't patients, it comes just hours after the Health Secretary Wes Streeting pleaded with GPs not to vote for strike action, warning that, quote, taking collective action will only punish patients. So, tonight I'm asking, are GPs punishing patients to get more money? Let me know your thoughts. gbnews.com/your say, or tweet me at GBNews and do vote in the poll. But first, going head-to-head, I'm delighted to welcome political commentator and broadcaster Christine Hamilton and junior doctor and trainee GP Dr Basha Mukherjee. Dr Basha Mukherjee, thank you so much for joining us. Is this industrial action justified?
So I think you used the term earlier on about GPs trying to punish patients, but the truth is that the way the current times are, patients are already getting punished. And if we want to stop things getting worse, this is the only option. Bear in mind, the recent GP contract was rejected by GPs months ago, and nothing was done since then. So as usual with this government, and as well as the last one, I don't know if Wes Streeting's going to turn things around, but, you know, this is becoming a pattern of the government working reactively rather than proactively to prevent harm being done to patients.
However, Dr Mukherjee, which other government department do you think this pay deal should be coming from?
Well, here's the thing. The cuts have been happening for years now. There's been 20% cut in the funding towards GP. And if you think about it, GPs see 90% of the patients in this whole country, and they only get 8% of the NHS pie. All we're asking for is a better overall amount, a percentage of the NHS pie.
Well, as you know, the country is running a budget deficit. We've got a national debt of over $2 trillion. So does the money come out of the education department, policing, or do we borrow more, perhaps, for future generations to pay?
I think that is for the Chancellor to work out, really. We're just in clinical staff, we're patient-facing. And earlier, what you were talking about, the slashing of appointments, it would mean that a GP would get to see a patient with 15 minutes rather than 10 minutes appointments. And actually, I would argue that in a way, actually, that's probably better for patients. I mean, you're probably aware when you go to see a GP, you get ushered out of the door, your GP is too busy typing, because we've got to fit all of this in within 10-minute slots. And we have to be watching the clock, which is such a nauseating feeling we don't feel rewarded by the process of seeing patients as it stands at the moment.
OK, Christine Hamilton, my viewers and listeners are, many of them, struggling to get a GP appointment at the best of times. Perhaps the government should settle so we can have a functioning NHS.
Well, that's what Rachel Reeves said, isn't it? She said it's much easier to settle than to pay the cost of the strikes. And they've now opened the floodgates by giving 22% to junior doctors. So not surprisingly, everybody else wants to jump on the bandwagon. I mean, GPs, my father was a GP, and I well remember the strikes in 1964. I was 15. And he refused to strike. He was a good old-fashioned GP, and what mattered to him was putting his patients first. He would have starved before he refused to see a patient. He worked, 24/7. He would go out in the middle of the night, etc. It was a completely different ballgame. But the fact is now the NHS is broken. It is completely broken. It is not fit for purpose. The GPs should be the front door to the NHS, but it's basically slammed in people's faces, and so they now have to go to A&E with all the resulting... But
isn't that because it's underfunded, Christine? Isn't that why the GPs are threatening industrial action?
You will never, ever, however much money you throw at the NHS, you will never have enough money. You have got to get private money in. They've got to do it. They've got to encourage more people. Tax breaks for people who take out private health insurance and things. The BMA, when they were against the NHS to start with, they're a pretty left-wing trade union, and they are delighted now. They've got a Labour government, so they think, right, this is a soft touch. We spend £180 billion on the NHS. That's £3,000 for every man, woman and child in the country. So if you take an average family, they're spending £10,000 to £12,000 a year on the NHS, and what are they getting in return? A very inadequate service. So the system simply doesn't work. And you ask where the money's coming from. Well, they've just taken some money, haven't they? Who uses the NHS most? Pensioners, because for obvious reasons. They've just taken a pile of money from pensioners because they've stopped the winter fuel allowance. Now, fine for wealthy pensioners, they don't need it, but millions of pensioners desperately need that. Stop the mad rush to net zero, stop all this nonsense, keep using fossil fuels, frack, etc., and you'll have far more money to go around. But the whole NHS is broken.
Dr. Mukherjee, one possible element of this industrial action is fewer GP appointments. That means that people that aren't well won't be seen. They're going to get iller, and some people inevitably will die. Are you comfortable with that?
I just want to correct you there that actually that is not the only option that's been proposed to GPs. And actually the BMA is asking GPs to work within their contracts. And they have proposed 25 patients as a safe number, actually. And I want to say that there are other options that GPs can engage in order to take part in the collective action.
Any of which will affect the functioning of a GP surgery, which will lead to people not being seen and potentially die.
Well, I would rather argue if we didn't strike and we continued as we are, there are multiple GPs who are committing suicide, leaving, going on long-term sick leave. They are working less than full-time. More and more GPs are working less than full-time. This has a knock-on effect on continuity of care. It has a knock-on effect on the GPs and trainee staff or whoever the doctors are who are working, because we just cannot retain staff. And now the government did come up with a solution according to their standards, which was the R staff, the additional role staff. Now, let me tell you, the additional role staff in my practice, they see a patient every half an hour. They're seeing far fewer patients. They've got a much, they're essentially free to employ by the GP practices. Okay. And there are serious safety concerns with these staff members. This is with due respect, Christine, I want to say that 1964 is not 2024, unfortunately. We are seeing patients with real complex healthcare. They are, of course, of advanced stage, but we know that more people are dying earlier. And we are seeing patients from other countries who can't speak the language. So there are real complex patients that we're seeing each day.
Dr. Basha, one very brief question, one-word answer if you can. Do you regret as a GP that the NHS shut down for 2.5 years for COVID? I
think the way however COVID was managed, that was It was not really something that we can look back and say, oh, this could have been done
Was it a mistake?
But
should GP surgeries have stayed open? Because that's why we've got a backlog, isn't it?
Well, partially, yes. But I want to say that GPs still continue to see patients. They continue to do telephone appointments. They still try to be as useful as possible to the whole system.
OK. Well, listen, Dr. Basha, what a treat to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Basha Mukherjee. We appreciate your time. A sentence or two. Last word, Christine.
Well, of course, I'm well aware that 1964 isn't the same as now, but a doctor is a doctor. They take the same oath nowadays that they took then. And the moral code and the moral standard that doctors worked to in those days was far higher. And as I said earlier, they put the patients first. Many doctors nowadays seem to put themselves first. And some of them don't work full time and yet they expect a full-time salary. The system is broken and it cannot be fixed by throwing money. We spend 11.3% of GDP on health. The USA spends 16.6%, you know, where Ireland spends 6.1%. However much money we spend, we're not going to fix it. We've got to bring in private money.
A spirited debate. My thanks to Christine Hamilton and Dr. Basha Mukherjee. Who do you agree with? Are GPs punishing patients by voting for industrial action? Karen says, well, except we won't notice because you can't get a doctor's appointment anyway, so no change there. Obs says, funny how the same overstretched GPs have all the time in the world for industrial action, and interviews with the BBC. 91% of you agree that doctors are punishing patients. 9% are sympathetic to their cause. Coming up, Suella Braverman threatens to defect to reform if Tory MPs keep attacking her.
I'm not going to defect to reform, no. And I hope I'm not driven out to reform by my colleagues.
Will the Tory wets drive all the true Conservatives out of the party? I'll be asking Anne Widdecombe shortly, but next. Victoria Derbyshire, presenter on Newsnight and one of the BBC's biggest stars, has tonight stuck the boot into Huw Edwards with unflinching reporting. Are the BBC top brass now at loggerheads with their own staff? Former top producer at the Beeb, John Mayer, says heads should roll. And he's next.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Warm and sunny for many of us into tomorrow. Some further heavy downpours, though, across eastern England at first. And through this evening, we could still see some heavy downpours. Into Friday, though, we will see a weather front arrive from the northwest. That's going to introduce much fresher air. But before then, still a fairly muggy night to come. And as I said, it's a risk of thunderstorms first thing this evening across eastern areas of England. But those should die down as the night goes on. So a dry night for many of us, but still feeling quite humid and muggy, as I mentioned. Temperatures quite widely in the mid to high teens across England and Wales. A little bit fresher further north, but still fairly mild for the time of year. Now, into Friday morning, there'll be some wet weather arriving into the far north and west, spreading into parts of western Scotland, bringing cloudier skies, some outbreaks of quite heavy rain. The winds will also start to pick up. It's a southwesterly breeze on Friday morning. Eastern areas of Scotland, northeastern England, though, still a bright start. Temperatures already 16 or 17 degrees by 8 o'clock. Another warm and sunny start to the day across Wales, many areas of England, but it's in the southeast where we've got that risk of some further heavy downpours through Friday morning. They won't be quite as widespread as we're expecting through the rest of today, however. And then once they clear away, for many of us, it will be a dry and sunny afternoon. However, wet weather is spreading into parts of Northern Ireland, much of Scotland. We could see some quite heavy outbreaks of rain through Friday afternoon. Turning a bit fresher behind this band of rain, but ahead of it, still quite a humid feel. Temperatures widely in the mid to high 20s. Now, on Saturday, that band of rain sinks into southeastern areas, so there's potential for some quite heavy rain across southern areas of England and the southeast, particularly as we head into Saturday afternoon. Further north, dry across northern England, some showers though across the north and west. Into Sunday, it looks a bit drier across eastern areas of England, but there will be further wet weather spreading in from the south and west and temperatures staying around average.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dewbs and Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Coming up is Suella Braverman on her way to Reform UK and into the arms of Nigel Farage. I'll be asking Anne Widdecombe. But first, star BBC presenter Victoria Derbyshire has blown the lid off the Huw Edwards scandal tonight. You might remember that a year ago, a whistleblower came forward to Derbyshire, revealing that they'd received inappropriate messages from the now disgraced presenter. Well, tonight, that whistleblower has said there are clearly questions for senior leaders in the organisation to answer about how it handled the situation in November upon hearing the news of his arrest. And there's more tonight. 2 further whistleblowers have come forward to BBC News, with one criticising the way that the internal BBC inquiry was handled, saying that they were disappointed not to have heard more about its progress. Meanwhile, the second whistleblower has sensationally leaked WhatsApp messages and pictures of a hotel room believed to be in Windsor, which he says Huw Edwards sent him in an attempt to convince him to spend the night together. The messages were sent at around the time of Prince Philip's funeral, when there were strict COVID rules in place. It's believed the plush hotel suite was paid for with licence fee payers' money. Well, I'm joined now by former top BBC executive John Mayer. John, good to have you on the show again. Is the Huw Edwards scandal a failure of BBC management?
Hello, Mark. Long time no see. Now, normally I come on and I defend the BBC. Not tonight. Some of this stuff is indefensible. This is management, senior management failure of the worst sort. The cops come to you and say, your main pace, we've arrested him, we've interviewed him on a very serious charge. And you say, oh dear, this is confidential. We can't possibly talk to him about that. Now, just imagine with you if the cops came to you and said, look, Nigel Farage, we've arrested him for murder, you know, what are you going to do about that? Would GB News leave him alone? No, this is a total management failure to not tell anybody, especially Huw Edwards, and then to continue paying him. I mean, the answer is very simple. What you should do is put his money into a suspense account, say, look, we're not going to pay you until we have a result from this, and if you get found innocent, the dosh is all yours. If you get found guilty, the dosh is all ours. This is very simple. Tim Davie is surrounded by management consultants, by PR people, by HR people, and by lawyers. What he actually needs is a few journalists in a senior management. He needs a crisis manager. He plainly doesn't have that, because every crisis, you know, it just blows up and the BBC ends up playing catch up. I mean, I'm sort of shocked at the BBC in this, as some of your people are as well. If you read the BBC alumni Facebook page, you'll see that an awful lot of old BBC folk are quite shocked by this as well. You know, they say this is not the BBC we know. So, you know, get some journos, Tim. Fire some of the people who are close to you. You know, get rid of the people who are pretending to advise you. Just get rid of them and get some journos, get some people who are crisis managers, and the BBC governors, or whatever they call these days, ought to intervene and say, look, enough is enough. We need to be much firmer on this. You know, we've got egg on our face.
John, briefly, if you can, is the position of the Director General, Tim Davie, untenable now?
I don't think it's untenable. I think he's in difficulty. He did an interview with the BBC tonight, as I think you saw, where, you know, he said we had to obey, we had to have the confidence and everything else. He didn't really say anything. I mean, you know, the BBC motto of never apologise. You should actually apologise. So we got it wrong. We got it wrong. We paid that man 200,000 quid for 5 months when we knew he was under investigation for a very serious offence. Put up your hands and apologise. That way lies honesty and trust.
It's not that hard, is it? Well, let's take a listen to the Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie. Here's what he had to say.
When someone is arrested, there's no charges. Also, another factor at this point was very significant duty of care considerations. I think it was right for us to say, look, we'll let the police do their business, and then, when charges happen, we will act.
Now, John, you were a senior executive at the BBC for many years. Did you notice any bad or inappropriate behaviour from your BBC colleagues when you played a senior role at the corporation?
No, nobody ever touched me up. Nobody ever invited me into their bed in a Windsor hotel. No, I mean, look, this is high pressure work. It's a glamorous work. So of course there will be relationships at work. I worked nationwide. With Frank Boff and Sue Lawley. One of them got convicted and the other one ran off with the boss. So I'm sure it happens in GBNews as well. And I'm sure there are probably office affairs going on.
I could name names.
No, you go ahead and name names and see the lawyers come out. But look, the BBC's had too many crises like this. They actually need a crisis manager. Somebody comes in and said, look, guys, you need to do this.
Most definitely. Is there a concern on your part about the long-term reputation of the BBC after this?
There is, because I think, what the BBC's done is turned it into the Huw Edwards Broadcasting Corporation, not the British Broadcasting Corporation. And they've looked after his mental health and worried about that. What about the kids in the videos? Yeah. What about the viewers? They should actually have cut Huw Edwards loose once they knew this and actually sat him down and said, look, Huw, what's the truth about this? And if there's any truth in it, goodbye.
John, always a delight to have you on the show. Look forward to catching up soon. Former top BBC producer John Mayer. OK, folks, coming up in a shock new development, the Italian PM Giorgia Meloni steps in to call out woke madness at the Olympics as a woman is beaten senseless by a fighter with abnormally high testosterone. On what planet is this progress? We'll be joined by a top female boxer shortly. Plus, I've got an exclusive that suggests Huw Edwards and his behaviour might just be the tip of the iceberg at the BBC. I'll be dealing with Huw Edwards and the Beeb at 10 o'clock. I promise you won't want to miss it. But next up, Suella Braverman says she'll never run for Tory leader again. Will the Tory wets drive out all the true Conservatives from the party? I'll be asking Anne Widdecombe next.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Prince Harry also revealed that he wouldn't bring his wife Meghan Markle back to the UK over safety concerns.
Let's talk to royal correspondent Michael Cole.
Good morning, Stephen. Good morning, Ellie. I mean, they live in California. I'm not sure what the murder rate is there, but that's a more dangerous place than Britain's at any time of the day. And of course, he compromised his own safety when he said in his book, Spare, his autobiography, which was Ghost Britain, that he'd personally killed 25 Taliban when he was serving with the British Army in Afghanistan. Well, that painted a target for life on the back of himself and his family, which was a very unwise thing for him to do. The other thing which struck me, it was that he invoked the name of the late Queen, saying that he'd had several conversations with his grandmother, and she'd been very, very supportive in his battle. He sees himself, and it's a word he's used, as a dragon slayer against the popular press, the tabloid press, and he's continuing with that. Of course, his brother, Prince William, has settled, but also in the programme was Hugh Grant. Now, Hugh Grant also has settled, as indeed did I. when I received an apology from News Group. I believe in a free and unfettered press. Newspapers are having a bad time at the moment, losing circulation, losing advertising. Young people don't read newspapers. And so I felt that the right thing to do was to settle. I didn't want to take punitive action against newspapers.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Coming up in just 10 minutes' time, does the Huw Edwards scandal shame the BBC? I'll be giving my take at 10. You won't want to miss it. Plus an exclusive. Is Huw Edwards the tip of the iceberg? But first, we welcome Reform UK's Immigration and Justice spokesperson Anne Widdecombe. The Tory leadership race is now underway, but a notable absentee is former Home Secretary Suella Braverman, who was forced to pull out after failing to receive enough support for her candidacy. In an interview with GB News' very own Christopher Hope, Braverman spoke about her chances of running for leadership again in the future, as well as addressing rumours that she may defect to Reform UK.
You won't ever stand again for Tory leadership. Is that because you get one chance, really, at that? I mean, look at Jeremy Hunt. He's had, I think, 2 or 3 goes, but with declining returns.
Listen, I very much hope the leader we choose stays in post for a very long time. We do tend to chop and change. Let's give it a good go. But no, that will be it for me, I think.
And what's next for you? There's talk about Reform. Would you ever join Reform?
I'm not going to defect to Reform, no. And I hope I'm not driven out to Reform by my colleagues.
Anne Widdecombe, welcome to the show. Like you, Suella Braverman is a canny political operator. She certainly left the door open to a defection to Reform, hasn't she?
Oh, she certainly did, because first of all, she says, you know, quite conclusively, I'm never going to defect to Reform. And then suddenly comes this crazy qualification which says, oh, but of course I might be driven there by my colleagues. So, yes, I think she's left the door open for that, if that is what she wants.
Anne, should Suella Braverman join Reform?
Oh, look, we're not going after anybody, and we're not, you know, trying to persuade anybody to join us. We've got plenty of people doing that because they want to. And as far as Reform is concerned, you know, that is a matter for Suella. I'm sure if she did apply to us, we'd look at it very, very favourably. But we're not going there with a begging bowl. That is not our style.
Would it be a good move for her politically and career-wise, do you think? Would it enhance her career?
Well, I don't think she's got much of one left in the Conservative Party. So I suppose the answer has got to be, you know, that may be a route for her. But I say again, and I can't stress enough, it's for her to decide, not anybody else.
You know the Conservatives very well. You served them with duty and diligence for many decades. How damaging would it be to the Tories if she were to defect? She's one of the most high-profile and best-known politicians in the country.
Oh, I think it would be damaging because it would sound as if there was no place for somebody with her views in the Tory party. You know, that's the bit that would be damaging. Yes, it would certainly damage the Tory party if that happened. But, you know, parties tend to get over that sort of damage. I mean, I see much longer-term issues of a party that has first got to rediscover not its right or its left, which is what it's obsessed with at the moment, but with its discipline. Without that, it's not going to do anything.
However, does the former Home Secretary, who has had a great career in politics, really want to join Reform UK, which is seen by many as a fringe outfit populated by nutters and extremists?
Oh, indeed, yes. I forget what David Cameron said, but he said something similar about UKIP, closets racists and things. And, oh, yes, and we were swivel-eyed loons. I well remember that. So, yeah, that is fairly common, that level of abuse. But What you've got to ask is, what do people do? That's the really big question. Now, we got a higher percentage share of the vote than the Lib Dems. Since then, we have almost doubled our membership since then. So clearly, people are flocking to us. It is our duty now to make sure that they're properly led and in the right direction. And if that is so, then I don't think we need to worry about, the perceptions of the Tory party.
And do you think that Reform UK should think twice about accepting Suella Braverman into the party if she chose to join? After all, whilst Home Secretary, she presided over very high levels of legal and illegal immigration. Do you really want someone like that in Reform?
Oh, they all did. They all did. Unless we're going to say absolutely no Tories at all. And I mean, they were all guilty of that, all guilty of much rhetoric. And just then producing far too little action. And indeed, I once challenged Suella with that to her face, and she said, yes, it's quite true. But then she produced a long series of reasons why she wasn't able to do the things that she wanted to do. And I think that is quite key to her unrest. She was very, very frustrated. She knew what she wanted to do. She knew what she believed the people wanted her to do, but she was frustrated from doing it by the court.
And sorry to interrupt you, I'm on the clock. A quick one if you can. Is the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, right to say that he's going to crack down on the far right so they don't cause a summer of chaos?
Well, he's a distraction from his own problems with his far left, isn't it? And I think everybody can see that.
And what a treat to see you again. We'll catch up on Sunday at 10:15, as always, for Mark Dolan tonight, former government minister Anne Widdecombe. Coming up, in a shock new development, the Italian PM Giorgia Meloni steps in to call out woke madness at the Olympics as a woman is beaten senseless by a fighter with abnormally high testosterone and essentially akin to a biological male. On what planet is this progress? We'll be joined by a top female boxer shortly. But first, as it's revealed, the embattled BBC knew of Huw Edwards' arrest in November, but paid his full salary for months afterwards. I've got an exclusive that suggests Edwards' behaviour might just be the tip of the iceberg. Now, let me tell you about this Huw Edwards story, because the Sun newspaper, GB News, and my own programme got dog's abuse for covering the Huw Edwards story a year ago. There were so many questions to answer about his alleged behaviour, serious concern from this alleged youngster that he'd paid a large amount of money to, lawyers' fees, crisis managers. I smelt a rat and I called it. And I make no apologies for having done that. And so I'll be tackling this story, which is a matter of national interest, at 10 o'clock. Don't forget, this is the BBC. It is our national state broadcaster, who I would argue have brought themselves into disrepute. So it's a very special monologue at 10 o'clock. It's all about Edwards and the BBC and the media elite who circled the wagons to protect him. So a busy hour to come, lots to get through, plus tomorrow's papers. I'll see you shortly.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Warm and sunny for many of us into tomorrow. Some further heavy downpours, though, across eastern England at first. And through this evening, we could still see some heavy downpours. Into Friday, though, we will see a weather front arrive from the northwest. That's going to introduce much fresher air. But before then, still a fairly muggy night to come. And as I said, it's a risk of thunderstorms first thing this evening across eastern areas of England. But those should die down as the night goes on. So a dry night for many of us, but still feeling quite humid and muggy, as I mentioned. Temperatures quite widely in the mid to high teens across England and Wales. A little bit fresher further north, but still fairly mild for the time of year. Now, into Friday morning, there'll be some wet weather arriving into the far north and west, spreading into parts of western Scotland, bringing cloudier skies, some outbreaks of quite heavy rain. The winds will also start to pick up. It's a southwesterly breeze on Friday morning. Eastern areas of Scotland, northeastern England, though, still a bright start. Temperatures already 16 or 17 degrees by 8 o'clock. Another warm and sunny start to the day across Wales, many areas of England, but it's in the southeast where we've got that risk of some further heavy downpours through Friday. Friday morning. They won't be quite as widespread as we're expecting through the rest of today, however. And then once they clear away, for many of us, it will be a dry and sunny afternoon. However, wet weather is spreading into parts of Northern Ireland, much of Scotland. We could see some quite heavy outbreaks of rain through Friday afternoon. Turning a bit fresher behind this band of rain, but ahead of it, still quite a humid feel. Temperatures widely in the mid to high 20s. Now on Saturday, that band of rain sinks into southeastern areas, so there's potential for some quite heavy rain across southern areas of England and the southeast, particularly as we head into Saturday afternoon. Further north, dry across northern England, some showers though across the north and west. Into Sunday, it looks a bit drier across eastern areas of England, but there will be further wet weather spreading in from the south and west and temperatures staying around average.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You really could become the next big Great British Giveaway winner with your chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash to spend on anything you like. Listen to what some of our previous winners have to say about winning big with us.
On the day that I got the money in the bank account, everything just seemed a lot sunnier.
But I do have something to spend it on.
Just go for it. It's an absolute must.
Thank you, GBNews.
Amazing feeling to win.
For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewbs, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dewbs and Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it is 10 o'clock. This is Patrick Christys tonight with me, Mark Dolan. This hour, we will bring you a bombshell BBC exclusive that raises serious fears that more predators and bullies are working at the corporation in the aftermath of the Huw Edwards scandal. Is our national state broadcaster still fit for purpose? I'll be giving my unapologetic and fearless verdict in just 2 minutes' time. Plus,
kids are young, they're 3 and 5. They're amazing.
May the Lord help us. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are back on tour. They've announced plans to visit Colombia. Have those people not suffered enough? So, does this blow up the Duke's claims that he's concerned about his family's security in the UK? We'll tackle that later this hour. Also, in a shocking new development, the Italian PM Giorgia Meloni steps in to call out woke madness at the Olympics as a woman is beaten senseless by a fighter with abnormally high testosterone. On what planet is this progress? We're joined by a top female boxer shortly. How long before a woman dies? I'll bring you the first of tomorrow's front pages with my press pack. Tonight with me this evening, political consultant Suzanne Evans, Conservative peer Lord Bailey and former Labour Party advisor Matthew Larzer. Oh, and what's going on here?
Hey! Welcome to the US! Welcome to the US!
That's what I call Stop the Boats. I shall reveal all in the next hour. Lots to get through. Let's get to work. Following the Huw Edwards scandal, is our national state broadcaster fit for purpose? A GB News exclusive suggests otherwise, and that's next.
The top story from the GB newsroom tonight. There are concerns that content on some social media platforms stoked unrest across the UK following the stabbing of 3 little girls in Southport on Monday. Online accounts were reportedly urging people to wear masks and meet up in town to deliberately cause unrest. Well, earlier, the Prime Minister issued a warning to social media companies after that misinformation spread online about the identity of the attack suspect as well. Sir Keir Starmer announced he's forming a violent disorder unit, giving police officers more power to tackle mobs.
The community of Southport had to suffer twice. A gang of thugs got on trains and buses, went to a community that is not their own, a community grieving the most horrific tragedy.
Well, that was the Prime Minister, and earlier on a male teenager, was charged over that mass stabbing in Southport, and he was named as Axel Rudakubana. 3 children, 7 years old Elsie Dot, Alice Ugwa, who was 9, and 6 years old Baby King, were killed in that attack on Monday night. But 2 other girls injured in the stabbing spree have now left hospital. Well, in other news developing tonight, coming to us from Hartlepool, we can tell you that police have said an 11-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of arson after a police vehicle was set alight during last night's disorder in the town. The Assistant Chief Constable, David Felton, has shared a statement online. He says this is very much a live investigation and we're continuing to work to identify those involved in the disorder yesterday evening and bring them to justice. Now, news about the BBC, and 2 whistleblowers have tonight criticised the corporation for how it handled an internal inquiry into its former newsreader Huw Edwards. They're accusing the broadcaster of sweeping the allegations under the carpet, including claims the former newsreader sent suggestive messages alongside a picture of his hotel suite in Windsor at the time of Prince Philip's funeral. Their comments, published first in the Sun newspaper, come after the 62-year-old admitted this week to accessing indecent images of children. Following his guilty plea at Westminster Magistrates Court, it's emerged the BBC had known since last November that Mr Edwards had been arrested. Well, the Director-General, Tim Davies, says the corporation chose not to sack him in case he wasn't charged. 7 Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested after the blocking of a passenger search area at Heathrow's Terminal 5. The group was seen holding signs saying "Oil kills" and "Sign the treaty" in front of the barriers, which is the area for departing passengers. The airport says the disruption was minimal and its terminals continue to operate as normal. It comes after a protest on Tuesday that saw 2 activists arrested for splattering orange paint throughout the terminal. One last bit of good news at the end of this bulletin. It was a long time coming, but the Bank of England has finally cut the base rate of interest. The cost of borrowing has been slashed to 5% from 5.25%, the first drop since March 2020. And it comes as new data suggests the cost of living crisis is now easing thanks to inflation cooling off. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Polly Middlehurst. I'm back in an hour. See you then.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Who knew that a row about bullying on Strictly Come Dancing was the very least of the BBC's worries? Now, of course, the Beeb cannot be held responsible for the appalling behaviour of one individual, on this occasion Huw Edwards. But it's my view that the stars at the BBC have far too elevated a status, given that their wages are paid for by you and me. BBC stars are essentially public servants, but do not behave as such. They rather behave as pampered prima donnas. The Edwards bombshell comes just a week after the official BBC salaries came out, which revealed that Gary Lineker is still raking in a ridiculous £1.3 million a year for reading out football scores. And stars like Zoe Ball, a very nice person, no doubt, is paid just shy of £1 million a year to play records on the radio. All of this funded by hard-up grannies who are threatened with jail if they don't cough up £170. Now a harder task, since this wonderful new government has taken the winter fuel allowance off so many of them. Meanwhile, someone who I hope will be shivering in a jail cell this winter is the vile Huw Edwards, a BBC icon who turned out to be in possession of some of the most horrific material imaginable, involving the worst possible crimes against children as young as 7. But Edwards may have been an accident waiting to happen long before yesterday's guilty plea. It wasn't just the brave and bold Sun newspaper who pursued this story. Myself and the team here at GB News also covered it. I wouldn't let it go or back down. And tonight, in another twist, 2 whistleblowers have come forward to BBC News. One of them has leaked WhatsApp messages and pictures of a hotel room believed to be in Windsor, which they say Huw Edwards sent them in an attempt to convince them to spend the night together. The messages were sent at the time of Prince Philip's funeral, when there were strict COVID rules still in place. It's believed that the hotel suite was paid for with licence fee payers' money. Of course it was. For the last year, Edwards stayed at the BBC on full pay of almost £500,000 of your money and a pay rise of 40 grand. Now, I'm not sure what you do for a living, but I think you'll agree you wouldn't last 5 minutes in a real job at a real company if that's how you behaved. But it seems to be different rules for BBC stars to the rest of us. Tonight, the BBC Director General, Tim Davie, has defended the corporation's handling of the affair.
When someone is arrested, there's no charges. Also, another factor at this point was very significant duty of care considerations. I think it was right for us to say, look, we'll let the police do their business, and then, when charges happen, we will act.
Do me a favour, but GB News can exclusively reveal tonight that Huw Edwards may not be alone. According to our sources at the corporation, complaints from BBC staff have increased year on year. Last year alone, 50 serious cases were formally lodged with bosses, 46 for harassment and bullying, and 4 for sexual harassment. This is an increase of over 30% year on year. Now, we've reached out to the BBC for comment, but are yet to hear back. This raises serious fears that more predators and more bullies are working at our state broadcaster. Once a source of national pride, the BBC is becoming a national embarrassment. It looks like Huw Edwards may not be the only casualty of this scandal. Let's get reaction now from my top pundits this evening. We have political consultant Suzanne Evans, Conservative peer Lord Bailey, and top Labour Party insider, former advisor Matthew Larser. Great to see all three of you. Busy hour. Let's get cracking. Sean Bailey, how are you tonight?
I am fine.
In better shape than the reputation of the BBC. Where do they go from here?
Look, there's 2 things to be said. People might not like how they dealt with Hugh's particular case, but they couldn't get rid of him until he'd been charged innocent until proven guilty. That is the basis of our law, and they had to treat him that way, and if they didn't, they could end up in hot water with employment tribunals, etc. Their problem is, when did they know? What did they know? Has he been treated any differently to anybody else? And if you take the widest view, the minute the likes of Russell Brand was written off, he was piled upon, but Huw wasn't. Was somebody in there defending him? And all they need to do as the BBC is 2 things: be open and honest. So if there's any more allegations about anybody else, just put it out there, because they're not responsible for people's behaviour, but they will be seen as responsible for a cover-up. And they also have to demonstrate that they treated everybody the same. So if you're the janitor And this happens to you, you get treated the same. If you don't, then they've got a problem.
Matthew Larser, Huw Edwards was being investigated by the BBC a year ago. Do these stars at the Beeb have too much power?
No, I don't think they do. And I think, I agree with Sean, it's a very difficult issue for BBC management. And the problem here with the whole Huw issue is there were two separate controversies. The first was the original stories that the Sun broke of 35,000.
Large payment to a young individual that was described as vulnerable.
Yes, and sort of, pictures in his pants to people in their early 20s, etc., which was clearly inappropriate, and for which he then had a breakdown and went into inpatient mental health treatment. So that was going on, and then in November it looks like the police started investigating him for the offences that came to court yesterday. We're not absolutely sure the exact date he was charged on, and therefore when and whether the BBC ends at charge or it ends at conviction, because of course when you're charged you're still not guilty. But I think Sean's absolutely right. We have to ensure that the same rules are applied to anybody across the BBC, and if they haven't been in this case, then people have got questions to answer.
Suzanne, do the BBC have a case to answer?
Well, I think we're all going to agree on this, actually. Innocent until proven guilty is so vital to our society. It absolutely is, and I don't really think the BBC could have done anything else, frankly. However, we've now had whistleblowers come forward. Now, did those people talk to the BBC management before? Was that covered up? Was it shoved under the carpet? It wouldn't surprise me if it was. I used to work at the BBC. I've certainly had experiences where I remember working with one particular guy who was a little bit too handsy. We all used to laugh at him, frankly, thought he was a dirty old man. But we knew that if we'd complained, it wouldn't have been him that would have been fired, it would have been us. So this is going back a long time.
In what I've just said earlier, which is that the BBC stars are enjoying too elevated a position, almost untouchable.
Yeah, I think that's right, and that certainly was the case then, although I am going back 20, 30 years here, so things, one would hope, has changed.
My contact at the Beeb is suggesting that there were allegations around Huw Edwards going back many years. Now, they may or may not have been borne out by the facts, but there were concerns about his behaviour going back many years.
Look, what the BBC has to understand, it's the BBC that is the star, not their talent.
Right.
Let's be very clear. It doesn't matter which programming you are. If they replaced you with a donkey, people would still tune in because it's the BBC.
There are some programmes that would be improved. Match of the Day.
I think you've hit the nail on the head about Match of the Day, which is that because the BBC has let Gary Lineker run wild, as it were, and not applied the rules to Gary that are applied to the other 20,000 people who work at the BBC, then that has meant that when something like this comes along, which is clearly a complicated and sensitive issue, people are going, hang on, maybe the stars are out of control.
Yeah. Sean, do you fear for the long-term reputation of the BBC? Is this going to make my viewers and listeners more angry about paying almost £170 a year?
100% yes. The BBC are having to operate in a modern world where people are used to paying for what they want, not what they're given. And I think more and more they'll have to justify the fee. And if these scandals keep popping up and the BBC management is seen not to deal with them, people will begin to push back.
Most definitely. Well, look, coming up, I will deliver the first of tomorrow's front pages hot off the press with full pundit reaction. Plus, Harry and Meghan give their first joint TV interview since the infamous Oprah sit-down.
Our kids are young. They're 3 and 5. They're amazing.
Isn't it great to see both of them back on TV? Next up, though, in a shock new development, the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni steps in to call out the woke madness at the Olympics and a very controversial boxing match. We'll discuss that next.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Prince Harry, he's back again. He's reignited the row over Meghan Markle's shattered relationship with Britain. In an ITV interview aired last night, he explained why he still feels it's too dangerous to bring his wife back to the UK.
It's still dangerous, and all it takes is one lone actor, one person who reads this stuff to act on what they have read, and whether it's a knife or acid, whatever it is, and these are things that are a genuine concern for me. It's one of the reasons why I won't bring my wife back to this country.
So will we ever see Meghan Markle back in Britain? I'm delighted to welcome the former royal correspondent at the Daily Express, Richard Palmer.
Well, I think there is certainly a history of far-right extremists targeting Harry and Meghan. You know, there have been a couple of quite prominent cases, I think. But I'm always a bit perplexed by this argument that Harry comes up with, because if you look at, say, homicide rates, comparing the US and the UK, the last figures I saw, you were about four times more likely to be murdered in the US than you are in the UK. And sure, we've got our problems over here, but you know, given that they've got such a high prevalence of people with guns over there, I would have thought the risks were higher over there than over here. And I think we have seen increasingly in the last couple of years that they have become polarising figures in the US as well as in the UK. Perhaps not quite to the same extent, but there does seem to be a bit of a political divide, that if you're a Democrat, you're perhaps more likely to be sympathetic towards Harry and Meghan. If you're a Republican, not so much.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Coming up, tomorrow's papers, but first, the row that is rocking the sporting world. Yes, the Paris Olympics was thrown into chaos today after a female Italian boxer was forced to quit her match after just 46 seconds, surrendering to an opponent who had previously failed testosterone and gender eligibility tests. In extremely rare scenes, Italian Angela Carini was forced to quit the match in under a minute after Algeria's Imane Khalife landed a serious blow to her face. The Italian knelt down in floods of tears in the ring after the fight, appearing to refuse to shake Khalife's hand when the decision was announced. Carini said that she quit because of intense pain in her nose after the opening punches. Following the fight, Carini's coach said, "I don't know if her nose is broken. I have to speak with the girl, but many people in Italy tried to call and tell her, 'Don't go, please. It's a man. It's dangerous for you.'" The fact a female boxer was forced to compete against an opponent with sky-high testosterone who has previously failed eligibility tests has drawn angry criticism from J.K. Rowling, the best-selling author, and even Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who said, "I think that athletes who have male genetic characteristics should not be admitted into women's competitions. Not because we want to discriminate against anyone, but in order to protect the right of female athletes to be able to compete on equal terms. From my point of view," she says, "it was not an even contest." Well, I'm delighted to welcome former six-time Scottish boxing champion Gardner Moore. Gardner, thank you so much for joining us. Was Angela Carini put in unnecessary danger today?
Yes, I believe so. And I have to agree with Prime Minister Meloni that this contest never should have gone ahead, and that if her opponent was found ineligible in the 2023 World Championships due to elevated testosterone and an XY chromosome, that it is not fair to include her in the Olympics.
Well, that's right. I mean, if you have an XY chromosome, that would identify you, in scientific terms, as a biological male or akin to a biological male, plus high levels of testosterone. How much of an advantage would a male boxer have against a female boxer physically, would you say?
For me, as an athlete, I have trained with men, I have sparred with men, and I am always aware of that strength disadvantage that I have being female. In scientific terms, I think 162% was the strength difference that that has been agreed upon. But that only applies to punching power, not bone density or muscle fiber, lung capacity, heart capacity. All of these things play into it.
Gardner, what is the worst that can happen in a boxing match between a biological male and a woman?
I mean, death is the worst outcome that can happen in any contest.
Really?
And well, yes, we have seen, unfortunately, quite a few deaths in the boxing ring. Mike Towell in 2016 was somebody that I knew personally. So that should tell you that it's not so much a case of losing a sporting event, it's a case of potentially suffering a life-altering injury.
How would you feel if you were in the ring competitively with somebody that had biological male characteristics? What would be your emotions if you were facing such a competitor?
I would think that this is not fair, and that as an athlete, it's not my responsibility to ensure that fairness. My responsibility ends when I step outside of the ring. And in the case of the Olympics, I think the IOC has failed these women. I think their governing bodies have failed these women. And I wonder why there is pressure on these women to take a stand and to protest instead of on their governing bodies for questioning why this was allowed to go ahead, or on the referees for saying we can't ensure the safety of our athletes.
Women's boxing is a growing sport. It's hugely entertaining. What is the mood among your fellow female boxers about this kind of fight?
When the IOC changed its guidelines in 2016, a number of us were concerned, and we all had these conversations in locker rooms that if this happens, this is the end of boxing for us because we just can't compete. And there are certain things that you can't overcome with experience, and one of those would be the advantages conferred by male puberty. So no matter how skilled a female is, she cannot beat a man of equal skill and experience. It's just not possible. So this is something we have spoken about.
Gardner, this fight has become one of the most notorious fights in boxing history. It's like the rumble in the jungle, but it didn't last very long, did it? Less than a minute. I understand you've watched it back. What did you make of it as it played out before your eyes?
When I watched it 3 times, and I watched Karini's body language going in, and she looks as though she knows what is happening. And I watch as she takes one of Khalife's shots, which pushes her back. And the first shots she takes to the side of her head, those are the shots that tend to hit you on the legs as well. So you kind of take a few steps and think, okay, I'm all right to carry on. And I think maybe at that point she realized that she couldn't overcome that strength disadvantage. And as a boxer, if I had landed the same kind of right hand that Khalife landed, which caused Carini to stop the contest, I would think, okay, this is time to step in and end it, because I know that she's hurt.
Gardner, it's been a privilege to speak to you. Can I thank you for your courage and your lucidity on this matter, unlike mine. It's been a really interesting and important conversation. Thank you for speaking up. Former 6-time Scottish boxing champion Gardner Moore. I think you'll agree, a truly remarkable and compelling interview. Has the world gone mad? Somebody with essentially male characteristics. We don't have to debate about is it a man, is it a woman. This is someone with XY chromosomes, with high levels of testosterone, a male physique. At some point, a woman's going to die in the ring. At that point, hopefully, wokeism will die with it. I think the world's gone mad. But look, let's get a statement from the Paris 2024 Boxing Unit and International Olympic Committee, who have said, we've seen in reports misleading information about 2 female athletes competing at the Olympic Games in Paris. The 2 athletes have been competing in international boxing competitions for many years in the women's category, including the Olympic Games in Tokyo, International Boxing Association World Championships and IBA-sanctioned tournaments. The IOC is committed to protecting the human rights of all athletes participating in the Olympic Games. The IOC is saddened by the abuse that the 2 athletes are currently receiving. Well, I think it was the female athlete that suffered abuse, which is why the fight lasted less than a minute. But it's all about opinions, isn't it? Next up, Harry and Meghan have announced a royal tour to Colombia and sat down together for a rare joint interview.
Our kids are young, they're 3 and 5. I mean, they're amazing.
So how do you feel about Harry and Meghan representing the UK on the world stage again? But next, get ready for the papers with some cracking front page headlines. Lots to get through with full pundit reaction. Huw Edwards, I'm afraid, is involved, and a lot more. See you in 2.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Warm and sunny for many of us into tomorrow. Some further heavy downpours, though, across eastern England at first. And through this evening, we could still see some heavy downpours. Into Friday, though, we will see a weather front arrive from the northwest. That's going to introduce much fresher air. But before then, still a fairly muggy night to come. And as I said, it's a risk of thunderstorms first thing this evening across eastern areas of England. But those should die down as the night goes on. So a dry night for many of us, but still feeling quite humid and muggy, as I mentioned. Temperatures quite widely in the mid to high teens across England and Wales. A little bit fresher further north, but still fairly mild for the time of year. Now, into Friday morning, there'll be some wet weather arriving into the far north and west, spreading into parts of western Scotland, bringing cloudier skies, some outbreaks of quite heavy rain. The winds will also start to pick up. It's a southwesterly breeze on Friday morning. Eastern areas of Scotland, northeastern England, though, still a bright start. Temperatures already 16 or 17 degrees by 8 o'clock. Another warm and sunny start to the day across Wales, many areas of England, but it's in the southeast where we've got that risk of some further heavy downpours through Friday morning. They won't be quite as widespread as we're expecting through the rest of today, however. And then once they clear away, for many of us, it will be a dry and sunny afternoon. However, wet weather is spreading into parts of Northern Ireland, much of Scotland. We could see some quite heavy outbreaks of rain through Friday afternoon. Turning a bit fresher behind this band of rain, but ahead of it, still quite a humid feel. Temperatures widely in the mid to high 20s. Now on Saturday, that band of rain sinks into southeastern areas, so there's potential for some quite heavy rain across southern areas of England and the southeast, particularly as we head into Saturday afternoon. Further north, dry across northern England, some showers though across the north and west. Into Sunday, it looks a bit drier across eastern areas of England, but there will be further wet weather spreading in from the south and west and temperatures staying around average.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Nana Acquia. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Emily Carver. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
OK, Faye and Lucy are ready with tomorrow's front pages. Let's go. And the Metro. Stabbings accused, named in court. Teenage killer unmasked. A teenager charged with murdering 3 girls at a Taylor Swift-themed yoga and dance class has appeared in court where a judge ruled that he could be named. The Independent. BBC faces awkward questions over continuing to pay Huw Edwards £479,000 after his arrest. Also, the boy who grew up to be charged with the murder of 3 little girls, Southport stabbing suspect Alex Radicubana, who is almost 18, is named in court after a judge lifts restrictions. Also, US journalist freed in biggest prison swap since Cold War. The Times now. Police will join forces to stop summer of riots, vows Keir Starmer. Let's go to the Telegraph. Starmer blames riots on far-right plotters, and BBC accused of sitting on internal report about Huw Edwards. And the Mail, Olympics outrage, a story we've just covered in the company of a champion Scottish female boxer. Watching this gruesome mismatch between a woman and a biological male left me fearing wokery will get someone killed. That's David Jones writing in the Mail. Also, patients to be punished as GPs start months of work to rule. Say goodbye to your doctor's appointment. Patients face months of misery after GPs launched industrial action that will see some slash their appointments by half in a move that means potential health risks for vast swathes of the population. The British Medical Association is threatening to bring the NHS to a standstill with a catalogue of crippling measures. OK, let's get reaction now. From tonight's top pundits, 3 good friends of mine, political consultant Suzanne Evans, Conservative peer Lord Bailey, no less, and former Labour Party advisor, top Labour insider. Let me tell you, this guy is well connected. He's on speed dial with Keir Starmer. Matthew Larser. Do you WhatsApp each other, by the way?
We don't, but I WhatsApp his people.
There you go. Well, that's enough. That's
where the real power lies.
One day you'll get to the big man, I promise. Right, so look, let's get into tomorrow's front pages. What do you think about this story, the boxing match between 2 women, but one of whom is considered in scientific terms to be akin to a biological male, Matthew Larser, with high levels of testosterone and an XY chromosome? David Jones writing in the Mail, I fear at some point someone's going to get killed.
What I don't quite understand is because this controversial competitor didn't submit to a gender. I thought you had to do this in order to compete. So I don't understand how they're able to compete when they refuse to have the test. That's what's
astonishing. They've not been allowed to compete previously, but they've got dispensation to compete in the Olympics. And I mean, the video is just astonishingly awful. Absolutely dreadful.
You don't care about the gender of this person, Sean Bailey. I think if somebody is, in scientific terms, a biological male, then they shouldn't be in a ring with a woman.
There's 2 things. There's a nuance here. So firstly, let's not just tip everybody into the box and see who comes up chemically as a man or as a woman. Yeah. Because there's an advantage to growing up a man before you lower your testosterone.
Correct.
So let's put that out there.
Correct.
Secondly, this is a shame on the Olympics organisation because the Amateur Boxing Association, they said, look, this is dangerous. We're going to ban this person from boxing in this way. And the Olympics didn't do that. And now look what's happened. And this comes to 2 things. Something that the Olympics has to be a paragon of. Fairness. You must compete on a level playing field, and the Olympics should be a paragon of that. That's the first thing. And secondly, it's about safety. Safe spaces for women. Women's sport should be sacred for women.
I don't think you can talk about it being safe in a boxing ring. I mean, boxing isn't safe. But the fact is, in this particular case, Angela Carini was completely punched almost to oblivion, and that's got to be wrong. I mean, boxing, you can argue, is an unsafe sport, full stop.
Boxing is safe if it's conducted with the rules. Hundreds of thousands of people across this planet box. Very few of them get hurt. Why? Weight categories, sex categories.
There are more injuries in rugby, aren't there?
Exactly. Boxing is safe if it's conducted properly, and this risks... And my wider point is about women's sport. Anybody who works with young girls will tell you it's very hard to get them to participate in sport. And if they see this, then you'll get even less involved in sports.
Matthew Larser, let's stay with the Mail if we can. Say goodbye to your doctor's appointment. Patients to be punished as GPs start months of work to rule. It's a big headache for the new Prime Minister, isn't it?
You know, it certainly is. I mean, of course, with almost being cynical, one could say that we've already said goodbye to our doctor's appointments, as so many of them are done on the phone, cursorily, if you're lucky, even to get a phone call. So, I mean, I think this is going to be very interesting, because I actually saw a play yesterday about with the battle between the BMA and the Labour government after the Second World War to start the NHS. Right. And this people forget, and all about how they were small businesses that people handed on to their children. children. Well, of course, actually, GPs still run small businesses. They're not employees of the state, unlike, obviously, people who work in hospitals. And so I think this is probably going to be a line in the sand that the Labour government draws. But there's a folk memory in the Labour Party of when John Reed, when he was Health Secretary in the last Labour government, to get through to make sure that the GPs were on side, stuffed the GPs' mouths with gold when they rewrote the contract the last time. That is regarded as a mistake, and I think they'll be anxious not to repeat that.
Indeed. I mean, are Labour going to roll over to their demands in the way they did the junior doctors?
I think the junior doctors who had a better case because they had fallen behind in pay, not the 35% they wanted, they got 20%, and it's not 20% in 1 year, it's 20% over several years. But no, I think people think there's more of a concern about how GPs are operating, and maybe it's time that we need reform of our GP system, to be honest.
But there's no doubt, is there, that in offering 22%, a massive increase to junior doctors, there's of course...
Which we can't afford, by the way.
Which we can't afford, absolutely can't afford. Rachel Reeves is talking about how there's this great big black hole in public finances. Well, she has just contributed
I think it's an extra billion a year just for the junior doctors.
Yes, they can't afford it. But, of course, in giving in and making that offer, which, of course, they haven't accepted, by the way, it's just actually going to encourage everybody else in the public sector to hold up for more as well. It's a disaster.
Do you take Matthew's distinction that the GP, the way it's funded is not in the sense in the public sector?
And it always makes me laugh how people talk about privatising the NHS while forgetting that, of course, just about every GP surgery in the country is private healthcare.
I think there's another line to take. I think for years now it's been the public versus politicians when you talk about the NHS. This move will make the public think it's the public versus doctors. Right. And I think there's not enough respect paid to the bill payer, the public, and they will start to demand certain things from GPs when they realise, actually, we pay you directly. It's almost a private arrangement, and you are now forcing us.
Yeah, I think what you might see is remember the polyclinics, which was the big idea. Yeah. They brought in a guy called Lord Darcy, who was a distinguished medic. He pushed this policy. It met resistance, which is effectively to have health centres that are more directly under NHS control and which do more than just GP, which bring together other services. I reckon that's going to make a comeback.
Because my viewers and listeners, I mean, this is a top priority for them, which is getting access to a GP. And even before the pandemic, it was a nightmare. Now it's almost impossible.
Yeah, my GP was one of the first in the country to stop doing... An appointment only exists if the GP decides on the phone if it does. And that was well before the pandemic.
And I've got to say, you do look quite sickly, so...
I know. I mean, this is makeup on.
I've got to be your last show.
You've had a good innings. Say nice things about me when I'm gone.
Polyclinics is an idea whose time may have come.
Yeah.
Because what I know of hospitals, forget all the dramas they've had, they're actually very well run. There's a high level of professionalism there. And if they come down to the level of GPs in what they deliver, I think they could be really impactful.
Suzanne, I spoke to a GP earlier in the show, and I put it to her that if you impact the daily functioning of a GP surgery, which is what some of these measures will involve, such as cutting the number of appointments, people are going to get sicker and some people will die.
Yeah, they will. And there's an absolute awfulness about all this. GPs have never complained about untrammelled immigration. The BMA never talks about that. They never talk about the pressures of immigration that puts on the NHS. And I hear they are saying, well, the system isn't working, system's crumbling, so we're going to work to rule effectively and make it even worse.
It's a poor contract.
It's ridiculous.
GP should not be allowed to strike. We had a lot of conversation in this country about who's a key worker, etc. I'm pretty sure GPs put their own self quite high up that list. They should not be allowed.
Do you think West Streeting got the cojones to put...
I do WhatsApp West Streeting, I just want to emphasise.
Is that right? OK. And what do you send him?
Well...
spare me the details.
Yeah, no, all very PG rated, I can assure you.
Good.
The issue that Wes will get really frustrated about is the fact that, of course, the public's anger at GPs, I think, is quite palpable. I think if every bit of the NHS, the public's dissatisfaction with GP services...
Yes.
Because at the moment, the most feared person in the NHS has always been the doctor, the GP's receptionist. But now, of course, because you don't get an appointment, they're often triaging you.
OK, let's sort of stop there. Unfortunately, Matthew, your microphone is on the blink, which is, let me tell you, a mixed blessing. Next up, as the Sussexes announce a royal tour to Colombia, does this blow up the Duke's claim that he's concerned about his family's security in the UK? So he's going to go to Central and South America, but not good old Blighty. Make it make sense. And I'll show you the couple's first joint interview since the infamous Oprah sit-down.
Most every parent needs to be a first responder. That is the terrifying piece of this.
How do you feel about Harry and Meghan representing the UK abroad once again? And more tomorrow's front pages, plus more bad headlines for the BBC and Huw Edwards. Don't go anywhere.
Britain's newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
We're joined now by GBNews national reporter Charlie Peters, who is outside Buckingham Palace for us.
Well, let's start with the expenditure, shall we? From the last year, it was £89.1 million. That's what the royal household spent. And one of the core parts of that expenditure was, of course, their big event last May, the coronation. £800,000 went into that. And then we should look at the engagements. You mentioned the number that King Charles made last year. Well, £4.2 million on those engagements, much of that travel. And then finally, how much that costs us all? Well, it's £1.29 per person. That's the cost of the monarchy to the taxpayer. But that really hides the truth of how that cash comes about, because all of the money that the royal household spends is actually theirs being given back to them by the Treasury. It comes from the Crown Estate surplus. That's a £16 billion portfolio they have, and their sovereign grant is made up of the surplus from 2 years prior. So in the year to 2022, there was about £350 million knocking around from the surplus. That was given all to the Treasury, and they were given back 15% as their core sovereign grant. Additional 10% was given towards the resurfacing of Buckingham Palace. That's been going on since Parliament voted on it in 2017. It's expected to take 10 years. But all in all, that's been about £86.3 million. And as you heard, the expenditure was £89 million. So how do they mix that gap? How do they close that gap in and cost out? Well, they make their own money as well from additional sources of income. And that was the gates, the receipt to Windsor Castle and their many palaces across the country, where people have paid about £10 million to visit in the last year.
GB News, the People's Channel.
More front pages, and we start with The Guardian. Police urged to step up action amid plans for 19 more far-right protests. Russia frees Gershwitz in biggest prison swap since the Cold War. And ice sheets 10 degrees centigrade above normal in Antarctic heatwave. Times now, police will join forces to stop summer of riots, vows Starmer. Russia in biggest prisoner exchange since the Cold War, and split decision brings interest rate cut, the first one in 4 years. Daily Mirror, Southport horror attack. Keir, I will take on far-right thugs. And thank you, Andy, it's been ace, is the other front page, as Andy Murray bows out. His professional tennis career is over with a rather impressive performance at the Olympics. Daily Express, British hero Andy weeps as glorious career ends. And Unmask, teen accused of dance class triple murder. The Eye, interest rate cut, too late to stop budget squeeze. Yeah, tell me about it. Should have done it probably about a year ago. OK, folks, let's get full reaction from my top pundits this evening. Political consultant Suzanne Evans, Conservative peer Lord Bailey, and former Labour Party advisor and close friend of Wes Streeting, Matthew Larter. OK, folks, listen, where shall we go with these papers? Good news on the economy, interest rates.
Thank goodness they started to come down.
Well, unless you're a saver. So I think it's always, good news when interest rate comes down. And to be fair, for most of us, who've got mortgages and all the rest of it, it is. But I do feel sorry for those people who are actually reliant on their savings as well.
I could tell you who it is good news for, the Labour government. One of the biggest problems in this country for building is high interest rates, and they want to build these 1.5 million houses. It should help that cause. Really briefly, only a couple of seconds if you can, all of you, but Daily Mirror, Sir Keir Starmer, I will take on far-right thugs. Is Keir Starmer weaponising the notion of far-right thugs to ignore a wider problem in our society, Sean? Yes, he is. It's a distraction from his own problems. And when they stop all these protests in the summer, they must treat these people the same way they treated Just Stop Oil and everybody else. If they do anything different, then they're guilty of 2 levels of the law.
Briefly, and can we start cracking down on those anti-Semitic hate marches as well, please?
Exactly.
OK. Matthew?
No, he's right to take on far-right thugs, but anybody who brings disorder to our streets, whatever their cause, needs to be tackled firmly.
OK, now, within months, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex will be on another of their unofficial royal tours, and this time they're going to the country of Colombia. The couple have accepted the invitation of Vice President Francia Marquez. and will engage in several activities related to ending violence and online harm against children. On that subject, they've just spoken to American network CBS, their first joint interview since the infamous Oprah sit-down. Take a listen.
Our kids are young. They're 3 and 5. They're amazing. But all you want to do as parents is protect them. And so as we can see what's happening in the online space, we know that there's a lot of work to be done there.
Almost every parent needs to be a first responder. And even the best first responders in the world wouldn't be able to tell the signs of possible suicide. That is the terrifying piece of this.
Yeah, well, I've lost the will to live. How safe will the trip to Colombia be? Both the US and UK governments advise against all but essential travel to parts of the country. This comes just a day after a royal source revealed that Harry remains frightened about his family's security in the UK and has reached out to the King for help. So, Suzanne, it's unusual for the Sussexes, but are there double standards at play here?
Of course there are. I've been looking up the crime rates. You know, the rate of homicide in Colombia is 22 times that in the UK. Crime overall in Colombia is 6 times worse than in the UK. I also think they're very hypocritical here. So they're going to Colombia to talk about cyberbullying, online exploitation and the mental health impact of these threats. But what's Colombia's #1 problem? Drugs. No mention of that. Hey, Harry, I wonder why.
No. So there you go. Britain, unsafe for the Sussexes. Colombia, not so much.
I'm going to have to contradict what's just been said. Look, if you're Prince Harry and your mother died in the way she did, being pursued by the press, literally, you have a trauma that you'll always have to deal with. And when you've seen what they've done and written about him and his wife, you could understand why he might feel that way.
Why hasn't he got trauma about going to one of the most dangerous countries in the world?
There's 2 things to say. If you're ever going to take a risk, this is a subject worth taking a risk for. You know, for the safety of young children. And let's be clear, he's been invited by the government. He's going to be looked after. He won't be wandering up and down the street. And the other thing is, of course, he will not be pursued by the press in the same way he would be here.
OK, I mean, I'm struggling to fathom why Colombia...
I think it's the last thing Colombia needs. I mean, talk about the sort of white saviour complex. Obviously, Meghan is of dual heritage, but it's the kind of Western saviour complex I mean, surely Colombia, solutions to Colombian problems lie in Colombia.
Maybe Harry wants to go to Colombia and go shopping, buy some special items.
I mean, the cyberbullying, I'm sure, is not the biggest problem.
I'm talking about souvenirs.
Absolutely.
I'm being very prejudicial here. I'm talking about funny hats.
I mean, never mind...
And maybe some elixir.
Special elixir.
Energy giving.
I have to disagree.
Yeah, Colombian Barocca.
I have to disagree a little bit with Matthew. Online bullying isn't white saviour complex. I'm very sensitive to that. I'd have picked it up. It's an international problem.
No, absolutely. What I'm saying is the solutions lie locally.
No, the solutions lie internationally, hence an international problem. But let's be clear, anybody who's going to use... This is the only good thing you could probably use celebrity for, to actually help people. And our children are very, very vulnerable to stuff online. So it's nice to shine a light on that. I think it's correct.
Well, that's good. Well, listen, Harry, of course, is formerly of the military, so he'll go to Colombia and enjoy a bit of marching. Good luck to you. It is now the small boats. That's right. Let's talk about the small boats that we have to contend with. Over in the States, they've got something else. It's not stop the boats. It's a jet ski crisis. That's right. Illegal migrants are being smuggled into the US on the back of jet skis, and they're getting a very friendly welcome. Take a look at the video.
Welcome to the U.S. They just crossed into the United States. I'm going to post it. Hey, welcome to the United States of America. Woo!
Welcome!
Yeah, you
made it!
And you think we got problems. The fall of the West can't come soon enough. Bring popcorn. OK, it's time now for today's Greatest Britain in Union Jackass. Suzanne, who's your Greatest Britain today?
So it's an honorary one. It's Angela Carini, the Olympic boxer, the Italian boxer. All that training, all that effort to be knocked out after 46 seconds by someone who's a biological male. Absolutely awful. I really feel for her. She deserves that award.
And a possible broken nose as well.
Yep. Bad, really bad.
Matthew, were you going to chip in?
Yeah, so mine is Stephen Lawrence and his family. They're preparing to bring his body back after 31 years. He was buried in Jamaica because they didn't believe he would be able to be at peace in Britain, and now they feel he will be at peace in his home country. So an incredible thing to do, and respect to Stephen's memory and his family's tireless work.
Most definitely, may God rest his soul, that poor lad. Sean, who's your Greatest Britain?
My greatest Britain is the Clink project that's in HMP Brixton, which they're now serving afternoon tea. But what it is, it's a project that helps people rehabilitate when they're in jail, which I think is really important. Yes, we want people to do their punishment, but we do also want to rehabilitate them so they can come out, get jobs and be productive.
It's great. I've been there.
We've seen... What was that, Suzanne?
I've been to that restaurant. It's fab. I agree.
There's a similar one in Norwich.
Did you get any sort of contraband items while you were there?
No. Yeah, I was a bit shocked. We had plastic knives and forks.
Right, yeah,
You're obviously not allowed metal ones.
You didn't find like a sort of a gun in your fruitcake or anything like that?
No files.
I'm glad to hear it. Sean, there's the boss of Timpson, who actually is now an advisor to the government.
He's a minister. He's the prisons minister.
Minister of... Right. Good luck to him. Now, he has done great things with his key-cutting chain, who are called Timpsons, and he employs ex-cons, doesn't he, and gives them a second chance.
I tell you why that's important, because yes, someone commits a crime, the first thing's punish them. But if you continue to punish them, we're actually punishing ourselves.
Yeah.
So there has to be a balance there. There has to be a balance. But what we must do is actually raise up our whole society with the idea of some level of responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed a guy that was in prison for a while, and he was a pretty sort of... he wasn't someone you'd expect to be in prison, Matthew. He was a very well-heeled, best-selling author who'd been a naughty boy, wound up in Clink. And he said he observed that it was such a waste of talent, all those people in prison, all that potential unfulfilled.
Absolutely, and so it's both reoffending, but also the impact on families when people are reunited, and whether you get families where it becomes when crime becomes endemic. So rehabilitation is important, not just for the people themselves, but so obviously fewer of us are victims of crime.
That's it. If you've gone down the wrong route in life, you want to be productive, and the best way to do that is to get back to work and rebuild your life. Well, I've got my winner. It's an absolute no-brainer. It's the memory of Stephen Lawrence. OK, and now let's have our Union Jackass. Suzanne, who's grinding your gears tonight?
So, the Rister, apologies to viewers who will get déjà vu from my appearance last week. It's Prince Harry again.
Is he back?
He's back again.
That's the double.
For his total hypocrisy on Columbia,
OK, don't disagree with that. Sean, who's your Union Jackass?
Mine is the Olympic Committee for allowing this debacle to happen in a boxing ring.
Yes.
Not separating people of different genders, whatever. They need to make a stand to make sure women's sport is safe, women's sport is a sacred space, and there's a level playing field.
Correct.
Sports makes no sense if it's not a level playing field.
Amen to that.
Mine's a little bit of politics. It's Robert Jenrick, one of the half-dozen campaigning for the Tory leadership. He's kicked off his campaign with a glossy video. Only problem, when he lays out the achievements of the last Tory government, he can only find 3, and, wait for this, 2 of them happened under David Cameron's premiership. Yes, that's David Cameron, who was Prime Minister, left number 10 8 years ago, 4 Tory Prime Ministers ago, and that's all Jenrick can think of praising. No wonder they're in a mess.
Oh, there you go. Well, the winner is going to be Prince Harry, of course, it's got to be. Thank you so much to Matthew, Sean and Suzanne. Really enjoyed your company. Most importantly, you at home watching and listening. A bit of housekeeping. Martin Daubney is off tomorrow, so I'll be on GB News from 3 till 6 in the afternoon, and then I'm back at 8 for Friday Night Live. It'll be a busy show tomorrow, but I can't have too much of your company. So thanks for watching and listening. The Brilliant Headliners is next. See you tomorrow at 3.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Warm and sunny for many of us into tomorrow. Some further heavy downpours, though, across eastern England at first. And through this evening, we could still see some heavy downpours. Into Friday, though, we will see a weather front arrive from the northwest. That's going to introduce much fresher air. But before then, still a fairly muggy night to come. And as I said, it's a risk of thunderstorms first thing this evening across eastern areas of England. But those should die down as the night goes on. So a dry night for many of us, but still feeling quite humid and muggy, as I mentioned. Temperatures quite widely in the mid to high teens across England and Wales. A little bit fresher further north, but still fairly mild for the time of year. Now, into Friday morning, there'll be some wet weather arriving into the far north and west, spreading into parts of western Scotland,